You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Traore. These were the words Hillary Clinton used to publicly humiliate Burkina Faso's president during a Global Perspectives interview that shocked viewers worldwide. But what happened next left everyone speechless. Ibrahim Traore's response wasn't just powerful, it completely shifted the global conversation about African sovereignty and sent social media into a frenzy. The world wasn't ready for what he said next. It started as another routine segment on Global Perspectives, the internationally acclaimed television program known for hosting world leaders and policy experts. Hillary Clinton, former U.S. Secretary of State and one of America's most recognizable political figures, sat comfortably in the studio. The soft lighting captured her practiced smile as she discussed global affairs with her characteristic confidence. For the first 10 minutes, she spoke about climate initiatives and economic partnerships, her tone measured and diplomatic. Then came the pivot that would ignite an international firestorm. The host mentioned recent developments in Burkina Faso, where President Ibrahim Traoré had been advocating for a new vision of Pan-African cooperation. Clinton's demeanor changed subtly. Her smile tightened, her posture straightened. What followed wasn't a casual comment, but a calculated attack on Traoré's entire leadership philosophy. This rhetoric of African self-determination sounds appealing in theory, Clinton began, her voice taking on a sharper edge. But what President Traoré proposes will lead Burkina Faso down a path of economic isolation. His rejection of established international partnerships threatens decades of development work. The interviewer's eyebrows raised slightly, clearly surprised by the directness of the criticism. Rather than softening her stance, Clinton pressed further. Pan-Africanism, as he envisions it, isn't progressive, it's regressive. It will create political disaster for the region and reverse the gains made through international cooperation. She leaned forward, emphasizing her next words. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Traoré. The studio fell silent for a moment. The host, attempting to regain balance in the conversation, asked if such direct criticism might damage diplomatic relations. Clinton dismissed the concern with a wave of her hand. Sometimes hard truths need to be spoken. The Burkinabe people deserve to understand the consequences of their leader's vision. Within an hour, clips of Clinton's statements circulated across every major news platform. CNN ran the headline, Clinton warns African leader against dangerous policies. Fox News declared, former Secretary of State challenges radical African agenda. The BBC featured analysis suggesting Traoré represented a concerning trend of nationalism in West Africa. What was striking wasn't just the speed of the media response, but its uniformity. Western outlets almost universally framed Clinton's words as a necessary warning from an experienced statesperson to a misguided leader. Editorial boards quickly produced pieces expanding on Clinton's criticism, with the Washington Post publishing The Peril of Pan-African Isolationism by evening. African perspectives were notably absent from this first wave of coverage. When Ghanaian political scientist Dr. Kwame Nkrumah appeared briefly on a panel discussion, his attempt to provide historical context about Western intervention in African politics was quickly interrupted by other panelists. Nigerian journalist Chinua Okafor's thread explaining the economic rationale behind Traoré's policies gained traction on social media, but received no mainstream media attention. The reaction across social platforms revealed a stark divide. On Twitter, thousands of Western users praised Clinton for telling it like it is, while across African digital spaces, the hashtag number #RespectAfrica began trending. One Burkinabe student's post captured the sentiment, they still believe they can lecture us about our own future. Colonial mindsets never truly disappear. As night fell in Burkina Faso, tension built across the continent. Clinton's statement, particularly her characterization of Traoré's vision as a dangerous game that would lead Africa back to poverty and isolation, struck many as revealing the patronizing attitude that often underlies Western foreign policy toward Africa. Political analysts noted the unprecedented nature of the situation. This isn't typical diplomatic disagreement, explained Dr. Mariama Sow of the African Policy Institute. A former Secretary of State has publicly accused a sitting African president of endangering his own people. The diplomatic implications are enormous. By midnight, the Burkinabe embassy in Washington issued a brief statement. The president has been made aware of former Secretary Clinton's remarks and will address them appropriately. This careful wording only intensified speculation about how Traoré would respond. The stage was set for a clash between two fundamentally different visions, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa's place in the global order. On one side stood Hillary Clinton, representing traditional Western influence and established international institutions. On the other stood Ibrahim Traoré, championing a new generation of African leaders seeking to redefine sovereignty on their own terms. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, citizens gathered in cafes and public spaces, discussing the controversy. Many wondered, how would their president respond to such public humiliation from one of America's most powerful political figures? Would he match Clinton's harshness or choose another path entirely? The world waited, tensions building, for words that would either escalate the conflict or transform it into something entirely unexpected. Clinton's words spread across the world like wildfire. Within hours, her interview created a divide so deep it seemed to split the planet along continental lines. Social media platforms erupted with reactions. Twitter feeds flooded with opinions, Facebook groups heated with debates, and WhatsApp messages pinged across time zones as people shared clips of the former secretary's statements. What was most striking wasn't just the volume of responses, but how differently people reacted based on their location. In Western nations, particularly the United States and Europe, political commentators quickly rallied behind Clinton. Major news networks featured panels of experts nodding in agreement with her assessment of Traoré's leadership. Clinton's honest assessment of the situation in Burkina Faso should be commended, declared James Mitchell, a frequent CNN contributor, as he adjusted his tie during a primetime segment. Her necessary warning comes at a critical time when radical ideas threaten stability in the region. Similar sentiments echoed across Western media. Political analysts framed Clinton's words as wise counsel from an experienced diplomat to a misguided leader. They praised her courage to speak directly about the dangers of Traoré's vision, often without examining the actual policies being criticized. Meanwhile, across Africa, a completely different conversation unfolded. University professors in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa published detailed analyses challenging Clinton's characterization of Pan-Africanism. On community radio stations in Ghana, callers expressed frustration at what they perceived as the same colonial attitudes dressed in modern diplomatic language. Dr. Amina Diallo, a respected political scientist from Senegal, captured this sentiment during a televised interview. When Clinton speaks of danger, we must ask, dangerous to whom? To African self-determination? To Western economic interests? This language reveals a mindset that still cannot accept African nations charting their own course. The online debate intensified as hashtags became battlegrounds for competing worldviews. Like Clinton Speaks Truth gained traction among American political circles, while Africa Deserves Better and Traoré Speaks Truth surged across African digital spaces. Each tweet, each post, became another soldier in this war of perspectives. Sarah Miller, an influential American political commentator who initially supported Clinton's position, found herself in the center of the storm. Her initial tweet praising Clinton's straight talk received thousands of likes from her primarily Western audience. But as African scholars and citizens responded with historical context and detailed explanations of Traoré's actual policies, something unexpected happened. I'm reading perspectives from Burkina-based citizens that challenge my initial reaction, Miller wrote 12 hours after her first post. Perhaps we need to listen more and lecture less. This simple acknowledgement of complexity from someone who had initially sided with Clinton sparked its own wave of responses, revealing how the conversation was evolving beyond simple for or against positions. As discussions intensified, pressure mounted on Traoré to respond. His silence stretched hour after hour, reaching a full day without any official statement. This absence of response created a vacuum that both supporters and critics rushed to fill with their own interpretations. Some Western commentators characterized his silence as proof of weakness or guilt. If Traoré had legitimate counterarguments, he would have made them immediately, argued a Washington Post editorial. But many African observers saw strategic wisdom in the pause. He is not responding to Clinton's timetable, noted a popular Ugandan political podcast. He understands this is no longer about one interview, but about Africa's right to determine its own future. The waiting created its own tension. People checked their phones constantly for updates. News channels kept breaking news banners ready. The anticipation built to such a degree that when the Burkinafaso government finally announced the president would address Clinton's remarks the following morning, it made headlines across 6 continents. What had begun as political criticism had transformed into something much larger. This wasn't merely about one leader responding to another's critique. It had become a symbolic battle over African dignity and sovereignty, a test case for whether African perspectives would be taken seriously on the world stage. People prepared to watch Traoré's response from living rooms in Tokyo, cafes in Paris, offices in Nairobi, and university dormitories in Buenos Aires. The world held its breath, wondering, would he respond with anger, defensiveness, diplomacy, or something entirely unexpected? As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, journalists positioned their cameras in the presidential palace. Social media users across different time zones set alarms to watch the live broadcast. What had started as a single interview had become a global moment, one that would test not just Traoré's leadership, but the world's willingness to hear African voices on their own terms. The world watched with bated breath as Ibrahim Traoré prepared to respond to Hillary Clinton's devastating critique. The presidential palace in Ouagadougou buzzed with activity. Journalists adjusted their cameras, advisors whispered last-minute suggestions, and social media teams stood ready to broadcast his words to millions around the globe. What does a leader do when publicly humiliated by one of the world's most influential political figures? The tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Many expected rage. They anticipated a fiery rebuttal filled with accusations and threats that would only deepen the diplomatic crisis. After all, Clinton's words had been sharp, direct, and publicly humiliating. The world braced for an equally aggressive response. But when Traoré finally appeared before the cameras, something unexpected happened. He walked to the podium with unhurried steps, adjusted the microphone calmly, and began to speak in a voice so measured and composed that it immediately caught viewers off guard. There was no anger, no defensiveness, no visible agitation, just a steady gaze and a clear voice that commanded attention through its very restraint. Former Secretary Clinton said, and I quote, "My ideas are dangerous illusions," he began, his voice steady and clear. Instead of avoiding her criticisms, he faced them directly, repeating her exact words before systematically addressing each point. This wasn't a leader running from criticism, but one willing to examine it openly. The first hint that this would be no ordinary response came with a question that shifted the entire framework of the debate. But I ask, dangerous for whom? For those who benefit from colonial power structures or for the people striving to control their own destinies? The question hung in the air, powerful in its simplicity, forcing viewers to consider perspectives they hadn't before. Traoré then did something remarkable. He made the abstract personal. He spoke of his childhood in rural Burkina Faso, where he witnessed firsthand how foreign economic policies impacted ordinary citizens. He described farmers unable to compete with subsidized Western imports, communities losing access to their resources, and young people forced to leave their homeland for opportunities elsewhere. When I speak of African self-determination, he explained, I'm not talking about isolation. I'm talking about dignity, the dignity of making our own choices, the dignity of fair partnerships rather than exploitation disguised as aid. With these words, he transformed what had been framed as a political critique into a fundamental question of human rights and respect. Perhaps most surprising was what came next. Instead of closing diplomatic doors, Traoré extended an invitation. I invite Secretary Clinton to visit Burkina Faso, not for formal meetings in government buildings, but to walk with me through our villages, to speak with our farmers and teachers and young entrepreneurs. True understanding comes not from speaking about people, but with them. This unexpected gesture of openness stunned international observers. Rather than escalating conflict, he had created an opportunity for dialogue. Rather than defending against accusations, he had invited his critic to see firsthand the reality he was working to change. Social media exploded within minutes. Clips of Traore's measured response spread rapidly across platforms, accompanied by comments praising his wisdom, maturity, and vision. What had begun as a potential diplomatic disaster transformed into a powerful moment of leadership that resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. News networks that had been primed for conflict scrambled to analyze this unexpected turn. Political commentators who had nodded along with Clinton's assessment now found themselves questioning their initial reactions. Even Clinton's supporters began posting more nuanced takes, acknowledging that perhaps they had rushed to judgment without fully understanding the context. "I've been following American politics for decades," wrote one prominent commentator who had initially defended Clinton, "but I've rarely seen such a masterful response to criticism. No anger, just clarity. No accusations, just an invitation to understand. There's a lesson here for all of us." The impact reached beyond social media. University classrooms from Dakar to Delhi used Traore's response as a case study in effective communication. Diplomatic circles noted how he had managed to stand firm on his principles while still keeping dialogue open. As the day progressed, Traore wisdom became the top trending topic globally, surpassing the hashtags that had criticized him just 24 hours earlier. The conversation had shifted dramatically, no longer focused on whether his ideas were dangerous, but on why different perspectives on development and sovereignty deserved respect and consideration. What began as public humiliation had transformed into something entirely different, a moment where an African leader changed the terms of engagement on the world stage, refusing to be merely a recipient of Western judgment, but instead asserting his right to be heard as an equal voice in the global conversation. In just 15 minutes, Traore had done more than defend himself. He had challenged the world to rethink how global powers engage with African nations and their visions for the future. What started as an attempt to shame Ibrahim Traoré became a pivotal moment for African leadership. His response transformed the narrative completely, showing the world what dignified leadership looks like in practice. Young Africans watched as their president redefined sovereignty, not as isolation from the world, but as the dignity to make choices on equal footing with other nations. His calm wisdom resonated globally. The debate between Hillary Clinton and Ibrahim Traoré ultimately served as a powerful example of how dialogue can overcome divisions and foster a more inclusive and understanding future, proving that mutual respect and a willingness to listen are the cornerstones of any meaningful progress.